Hello friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and I'm back with another video in our 2023 Three Rivers Challenge series. This is the pantry challenge that we do every year in the months of January and February, and we're now halfway through the challenge, which is exciting. This was a busy week for us, as are most weeks around here on the homestead, but we celebrated a birthday, which was wonderful. My son turned 14, and we've just been busy doing school and obviously making meals. So that's what I'm going to take you along with us on this week. I have 4 Pantry Challenge breakfasts. These are breakfasts that use up kind of items that you've stored up in your pantry, canned items and things. And these are foods that my family really enjoys, so I thought I would share these recipes with you. So we're going to go ahead and get started with Pantry Challenge breakfasts. So this first one is kind of a different take on a Dutch baby or a German pancake. I have a dozen eggs in the blender, and then to that I'm going to add approximately 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and I'm going to add a pint of home-canned applesauce. We have a lot of applesauce to use up on the shelves. Today I'm going to use almond extract. You could use vanilla extract. We're just going to put it all in the blender, get it mixed together. And this is what that looks like. It's kind of thick and creamy. We've got a greased cast iron pan here, and we're going to bake this in the oven on 350 for about 40 minutes or so until the center is firm. And what we end up with is almost like a cheesecake texture. This is what that really reminds me of. The applesauce in place of the milk really gave it kind of like a custardy, cheesecakey texture. And the kids really enjoyed this. And because it reminds me of cheesecake, we're going to add a half pint of blueberry syrup to just pour over each of these pieces. Now it really looks like cheesecake. And the children just really enjoyed this. It's just a different take on the usual pancakes or waffles, just something different to have for a breakfast. And it's a great way to use up some of that applesauce that's sitting on the shelves that we need to cycle through this year. This was something I just kind of made up on the fly that morning. I didn't have nut milk prepared in the fridge, so I decided let's replace the liquid in my Dutch baby recipe with applesauce and see how it turns out, and it worked out wonderfully. We're still working through that grapefruit. We used the last of it this week. My little boys like to eat the grapefruit just juiced. I juice that up for them in a cup because they have a hard time scooping out the grapefruit with a spoon the way the older kids do. But the older kids just enjoy grapefruit plain. We don't add any sugar or anything, and they kind of enjoy that sour taste. So we're very sad to see the grapefruit go, but it has been a wonderful treat. Next breakfast we're going to make is jelly rolls. So I'm taking my cinnamon roll recipe here, and we're just going to adapt it. In place of the milk, I'm going to use this small can here of organic coconut cream. And then in place of the butter that is in the recipe, we are going to use a half cup of olive oil instead. And that's how we're going to make this dairy-free for our family. And so I put the ingredients here on the stove. We have to get that coconut cream all melted down and get that sugar dissolved into these liquids. We're also getting our yeast activated in some warm water here, get that bubbling. The next step is to get the rest of the ingredients, the flour and the eggs and any dry ingredients, in a bowl here. Once the milk mixture is melted, we can add that to the mixing bowl with the rest of the ingredients. And then we can also add our yeast mixture. And we're going to put this in the mixer, get it all mixed together. We just need to knead our dough until we get it nice and soft, and then we're going to put it in a bowl here, cover it so that nothing can get on our dough, and stick it in front of the wood stove where it's nice and warm, and that will rise while I go tend to Miss Hannah here. About an hour later, our dough had almost doubled in size, so we were ready to move on to the next step. And this is exactly how you would make cinnamon rolls. We're just going to take our dough and kind of roll it out into a rectangular shape. And for this particular batch of rolls, I'm using a half pint of pear butter. I've done this with every type of jam and jelly that I have on my pantry shelves, and it always turns out wonderfully. You roll it up just like you would a cinnamon roll. You're going to cut it into your little roll shapes and put them in your pans here. And then I'm just chit-chatting with my buddy here over some hot tea while I do my work. We're going to put these in the fridge overnight to rise, and then when you wake up in the morning, they're ready to go straight into the oven. And then I put them in first thing in the morning. I can go about doing my morning chores, and then the cinnamon rolls or the jelly rolls are all done, and all my chores are done. It's just a super easy breakfast if you do the work the night before. So we are going to glaze the top of these just with a simple powdered sugar glaze. So I have powdered sugar here in my little dish. I'm going to add some water, and I'm going to add a little bit of this cinnamon extract. I thought that would pair well with the pear butter. Haha, pun intended. And then we're just going to pour that glaze over the top of the hot rolls, and it'll kind of melt and give it a little extra sweetness. So this is what those look like. The children were very excited about this breakfast. And I think this recipe made us about 15 or so rolls. So my little ones, one of them was enough to fill them up, and the older children were able to have a couple of them, and everybody was satisfied. So just in a little healthier version of a cinnamon roll, because you don't have all of that sugar in the filling. You're at least getting a little bit of fruit in. Okay, next breakfast we're going to talk about is just a breakfast casserole that uses up leftovers. For this particular casserole, I have 2 of my frozen hash browns here. I buy these in bulk from Azure Standard. We have some leftover sloppy Joe meat that we're going to use up in this casserole for some added protein. We just have some freeze-dried veggies that I rehydrated overnight in the fridge, peppers and tomatoes. And here is nasturtium salt. It's just freeze-dried powdered nasturtium plants mixed with salt that we're going to flavor it with. And then, of course, we have our eggs. And so we're just going to layer this up and make a casserole using these items. This is what that looks like. I put the hash browns on the bottom, followed by the meat and veggies, and then we just simply pour the egg mixture over top and then sprinkle our seasonings, our salt and pepper, everything else. And then with this, I'm going to also make my fruit cobbler here. I make this all the time. It's really simple. We have our batter all made up and put into a greased pan. And then I'm going to use up, I have a half of a jar of blueberry syrup, and I have some canned pears that are just sitting in the fridge that I can use up with this cobbler. And then these can bake together in the oven on 375 until they're done. And this is what we have. So nice on this day to have something a little savory along with something a little sweeter, and the kids can have a slice or 2 of each. I find a breakfast casserole like this is just a great way to use up odds and ends that you have in the fridge. Same thing with a cobbler, because you can use any fruit or jelly or whatever that needs used up. But if we're doing something like taco night, a breakfast casserole is perfect because any meat you have left over and any toppings can just be thrown into that the next day, and you really can't mess it up. You just have some eggs, you have potatoes, you add your meat and veggies, and it'll make a perfect casserole. On this day, sloppy Joe meat is what we had, and it just wasn't enough for a whole meal, so it worked out great in the casserole, and everybody was happy. So you really can't go wrong. It's fun to just kind of experiment and peek in your fridge and use up what you have. All right, next meal, we're going to make some yogurt. We have an anaphylactic dairy allergy in our family, so we have to use a vegan yogurt starter culture. I purchased these in bulk from Azure Standard, and I keep them in the freezer. But you can see that these have a sell-by date of January 2023. Because they've been in the freezer, they are perfectly fine to use right now, perfectly safe to use. But I do need to cycle through these, and this is the perfect opportunity during the Pantry Challenge to focus on doing so. So I have coconut milk on the stove. We need to get it to 110 degrees. And then we're going to stir in our packet here. You could also use a previous batch of yogurt, stir some of that in. You just need that bacteria in that culture. And when you get it up to 110 degrees, you need to take it off the stove and we're going to pour it into our yogurt machine. This is a secondhand machine that I got. You can use anything, a crock pot, even your oven, anything that will keep it at about 110 degrees overnight while that culture does the work. I've got a very cluttered counter here. It's always busy in the kitchen here at our house. We're working on, back there we've thawing some pork chops for dinner. We've got pie crust thawing from the freezer. And then I'm pureeing garlic while also making yogurt. So always something going on here at Three Rivers Homestead. So I'm getting that warm yogurt mixture into this yogurt maker. And then we are just going to get our lids on here. Some people say to leave the lids off while it's working overnight. I see no difference in it. So I just put my lids on, plug this in, and then after about 12 hours, it's ready to go in the fridge. We're going to also make some granola to go with our yogurt. So we have some oats here in a bowl. And to make our granola, for our fat, we're going to use olive oil. We also have raw honey here to sweeten it. And then I just grabbed things off the shelves. Freeze-dried fruit. We have some slivered almonds here, some craisins, and then some cinnamon. And there's no specific recipe here. I just kind of wing it and toss things in with the oats, and it's all going to make a delicious granola. So we just need to get that mixed together. You really have to use your hands to kind of work that honey into the oats. And then once it's thoroughly worked together, we spread it out on our cookie sheets. And I put it in the oven on 350. And then after about 10 minutes, I'm going to stir my yogurt around, stir my granola around just to make sure that it kind of evenly browns. Put it in for another 10 minutes, and then it's nice and crispy and browned. Smells amazing. The kids are going to really love this. So we're going to add some chocolate to this, and a great thing to do is to just take it while it's warm and put it in a bowl and add your chocolate chips. We're going to use white chocolate chips. Once again, I buy them in bulk from Azure Standard. They have dairy-free chocolate chips there for amazing prices, so make sure you check them out. There'll be a link in the description. But we just put them in with the warm granola, stir that around, and then those chocolate chips will melt down and kind of mix with the granola and evenly distribute a little bit of melted chocolate across. And it's so amazing, you guys. This tasted amazing. It smelled so good. All right, the next morning, I knew I was going to need something more than just granola and yogurt, so I'm also making a little French toast casserole. I had some bread left over from David's birthday meal. I allowed myself to purchase bread for his birthday meal. He wanted hamburgers. And then we were just mixing together a little bit of coconut milk and eggs and cinnamon, poured it over the bread. I've made this for you guys before. It's just a French toast casserole. So here's the texture of that yogurt. It was in the fridge overnight. You can see it's creamier and thicker. It has that sour yogurt smell, so we know that that bacteria has done its job. And we didn't sweeten this at all because we were going to eat it with the sweetened granola, and that is what will add sweetness to it. So we have our breakfast casserole, a little bit of powdered sugar on top, the last of the grapefruit, and then all of this combined is definitely enough to fill the bellies of my children on this very busy day. We had a homeschool co-op day on this day, so the kids needed to fill their bellies very early so we could get out of the house and get to where we needed to be. All plated up. That's what it looked like. The children ended up going back for seconds of granola because it tasted so good. This is how I kind of served it to the little ones, and everyone enjoyed it. So we have hit the halfway point of the Three Rivers Challenge, and I noticed that my pantry shelves were just a disaster. I was tossing empty jars anywhere that there was a hole, just kind of filling in, and then everything was a mess. So it's a great time halfway through the challenge to pull everything off and kind of reorganize. My goal was to make space so that all of the empty jars could go into one spot, and then I could condense all of the other jars into other areas. It was also a great opportunity for me to really look at what is left on the shelves and see what we've used almost all of it and things that there is tons left of. because right now I'm in the middle of starting my garden planning. And so this was an opportunity to assess what things we don't need to grow as much of this year, because based on what's left on the shelves, we obviously preserved too much, or we don't like it, so we're not using it. So therefore, I don't need to grow it this coming year. And also, it's an opportunity to say, we really went through all of that particular item way too fast. So that means I need to preserve double the amount next year and grow more of that item. And so I had my Elizabeth, my little helper here, and she eventually got out a pencil and paper. And as I noticed we had too many of a jar, I would have her write that down in one column of things that we aren't going to, preserve or grow as much of this year. And then if there were things that I noticed we only had 1 or 2 jars left and that needs to last us all the way until we're able to preserve it again, I had her make a note in a separate column that these are things that we need to grow and preserve way more of this year. And it was really helpful. So I encourage you, especially if, like me, you didn't take a detailed inventory prior to the challenge, this is a great opportunity to inventory right now while you're doing your garden planning. Every year I typically do a thorough inventory in December, but this year I just so happened to have a baby right before the challenge began, and I never got my detailed inventory done. So I'm just kind of taking inventory now at the midpoint so that I know what meals I really need to focus on making in the month of February. Right here, I found my stash of honey, and I noticed as I'm sniffing these jars that some of them are fermented. I'm putting away the ones that aren't fermented, but I'm going to share with you here a little bit later in the video what I'm going to have to do with these jars of fermented honey. It's just unfortunate, and I'll explain why this happens here later on. So after we were all done, Elizabeth and I finished going through our list here. I was working with her on her spelling, and we were fixing mistakes, just kind of taking one last look at the shelves, and this is the list that we came up with. Over here on the right, these are items that I'm not going to grow or preserve much of this year because we just have too much on the shelves or we're just not using it. And then over here is a list of items that I'm going to need to preserve more of because we don't have very much left. All right, now for that honey that I mentioned. If you look at all of this, this is fermented honey, and you can tell by smelling it. If I open the jars, it smells like straight alcohol, and the taste I'm just having an aversion to. So I asked on Instagram for some advice about this, and I was told that there are several reasons that this can happen. We must have harvested this honey when it was still uncapped and there was too much moisture in it. Also, I was told that if there's 2 different flour sources, that sometimes this is what your honey will look like in the jar. And so I'm going to try to salvage this. I was told that I can pour the fermented part off of the top and the crystallized stuff on the bottom will still taste okay. So that is what I'm going to try to do on this day. I'm just that liquid stuff poured right off, and then the crystallized stuff is obviously kind of stuck to the bottom. It's a little harder to get out of the jar. So it was pretty easy to separate the two. And woo, definitely smelled fermented when I opened these jars. I am very new to beekeeping. This is only 3 years I've been keeping bees. I have yet to successfully overwinter a hive. Lord willing, the bees that we have this year will make it through. They always die in the month of February for me, so I'm hoping this year will be different. But I'm still learning, and I've had 2 babies in the time that I've been learning about beekeeping and just haven't been able to give the amount of time to beekeeping that I probably need to. So this is the year that I'm hoping to throw myself into the bees because I love honey. It's, great for you, and I would love to get better at keeping bees so that we, have enough honey for our yearly needs. All right, this is 2 jars of fermented honey, and then I have all of this here of the crystallized honey. And when I sniff the jars of the crystallized honey, it actually smells okay. So I decided to take a spoon and taste it, and to my surprise, this crystallized honey on the bottom does not taste fermented. So that can be salvaged to be used for baking or any of our other normal uses for honey. That's a huge blessing. There's a little over 1.5 gallons. Now this fermented honey, I have 2 quarts here. And I'm going to try making mead with this. I have a friend that knows how to make mead. She's going to show me how to do that. And then this 1.5 gallons or so of the crystallized honey we'll use for baking. So I just thought I'd share that with you. If you have honey that fermented, it can still be salvaged. That worked out for me, and hopefully it can work out for you too. So other than all of the cooking of the meals and the, little food preservation projects that I've been kind of trying to keep up with, of course, it's heavy school time here in the winter. There's not a lot going on outside, so it's a great opportunity for us to get caught up on school. And so that's what occupies a lot of our time. I have a friend that gave Hannah here a little sheepskin. This is a Jacob sheepskin from sheep that she grows on her farm. And I've never had a sheepskin for my baby, and I just have to say, it's amazing. Look at Hannah just looking at the wood stove, laying on her soft sheepskin and smiling. She loves it. And as she turns her head, the softness on her head, just very soothing for her. And you can see here later in this video that she actually fell asleep here all by herself, just looking at the fire on her sheepskin. So forget the fancy contraptions for your baby. Get yourself a sheepskin and your baby will love it. In last week's video, I showed you how I make beef broth, but in this week, I decided to clear out some bags of chicken feet from our freezer to make chicken broth. I know it sounds disgusting, but chicken feet make the best broth because of all of the gelatin that you can get out of those feet, all the little bones and things. So when we butchered our chickens last fall, I saved all the feet, and that's what we're going to make broth out of. So just like with my beef broth, I use bay leaves, freeze-dried parsley, freeze-dried celery leaves. These are just the greens. We have peppercorn. Of course, we'll use salt, an onion, and garlic. And then we will also add a little bit of apple scrap vinegar. I found, what are these, kale stems in the freezer that I decided to use up. That'll just add extra nutrition to the broth. As I mentioned, we add the apple scrap vinegar. That will help pull the minerals out of the bones in the feet, and it will make a delicious broth. This simmered on the stove for, I don't know, maybe 12 hours throughout the day. And just doing its job here of pulling all of the nutrition out of these vegetables and the flavor out of the onion and the garlic and all of the gelatin out of the bone. And that night, right before bed, I decided to can this up. This is what it looks like. So I know what you're thinking. Chicken feet, ooh, gross. I've seen chickens walking outside and how dirty their feet are. There's no way I could ever do this. So I used to feel that way too, but once I learned how nutritious the broth is from the feet, I got over the ick factor. And when we butchered these chickens, they were run through the plucker, and that cleaned the feet off. Then the feet were soaked, and then the feet are scrubbed before they're bagged up. They were perfectly clean, I guarantee. If you're bothered and want an extra layer of cleanliness, you can boil the feet for a little bit and peel the skins off. You can even clip the little toenails off and whatever you need to do to get over the ick factor. But I guarantee that these feet were clean before they went into the pot. So we're just filling up our jars here. We ended up with 9 quarts of delicious broth. You can see a little bit of the green vegetable coloring there in the top, but that won't harm our broth at all. We're going to pressure can this and get to it. So you have to pressure can broth. You cannot water bath it because it is a low acid food. I'm putting on my canning lids here. As always, using my 4 jars canning lids. You guys know they're my favorite. I use these exclusively, and out of the last 13 months of canning exclusively with these lids have only had 1 lid failure. That's amazing. So use my code 3rivers10. You can get 10% off of your canning lids. All right, 25 minutes in the pressure canner at our altitude. That's at 10 psi. So just wanted to show you the difference between these broths. This was from the same batch, and one of them was stored. The one on the left was stored in the fridge overnight. This one on the right was pressure canned. You can see it's liquid, And the stuff that was subjected to cold temperatures is gelatinous. So there is going to be a difference in the outcome of the texture of your broth based on whether you can it or whether you freeze it or put it in the fridge. Now, both broths are still going to be good for you. You know, there's debate out there about whether or not canning kills all of the benefit of that gelatin. You'd have to look into that to learn more about it. But in terms of flavor, the flavor is still the same. It's just much more convenient to be able to store your bone broth on the pantry shelves versus having to find space in your freezer for it, or to have to make up a batch of broth on the spot every day when you need it versus having it, shelf stable and ready to go without needing thawed. So it's all a matter of preference and how you want to store it. I like to do both. I keep some in the fridge and freezer, and I keep some on the pantry shelves. And that's it for this week. Little Miss Hanny here turned 8 weeks old, and she's just a joy. She is the light of our life here. And now that she's 8 weeks, we can start working on healing. I have some work to do to lose the baby weight and do all of those things, but it'll come with time. All right, friends, until next week, I hope you have a great week, and we will see you later. Bye.